My mom is inviting you to dinner today. I read a message from my fiancé a day before the wedding. At the end of the evening, my future mother-in-law said something in Italian to her husband, and they both laughed. Before leaving, I smiled, took my mother-in-law by the hand, and said in perfect Italian, "Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story." The alarm went off at 6 a.m., but I was already awake. The air outside was damp and gray, just a typical fall morning in the city, but inside my apartment, I felt a jittery kind of light. 24 hours. That's all that stood between me and marrying Grant. On my small kitchen table, I had laid out my battle plan. There were the 2 registration tickets, a slim box holding simple pearl earrings for my maid of honor, and the infamous to-do list. I needed to pick up the final arrangement for the bouquet, drop Grant's suit off at the dry cleaner one last time, and finalize the music cues with our host. The list was getting shorter, which was a relief. I was doing everything I could to focus on the logistics, to keep my hands busy so my mind couldn't wander. I was sipping my 3rd cup of coffee, staring at the list, when my phone blinked. A message from Grant. My heart gave a little jump, the way it always did when he texted. It wasn't a sweet message, though. It was polite, but it instantly brought the gray weather inside. "My mom invites you to dinner tonight. She really insists. 7 p.m. Will you come, Audrey?" I read it 3 times. "My mom invites you to dinner tonight." The timing alone was insane. The day before the wedding? Grant's mother, Marjorie. She wasn't known for her spontaneity, especially not when it came to me. Marjorie was a meticulously organized woman, and I knew this wasn't some warm, spontaneous gathering. It was the word "insists" that really got to me. It didn't feel like an invitation for a warm evening, but more like a summons. Like I was being called in for a final inspection before I was allowed to sign the papers and join their family. She was running one last check. I put the phone down on the counter. I watched the workers outside my window, rolling coffee barrels for the cafe on the corner. Everything outside was ordinary, moving at its usual pace. People were heading to work, unhurried. But inside me, a silent tension started to coil, right in my gut. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was a cold, quiet anticipation of a battle I knew was coming. I picked up the phone again. I didn't want to overthink the reply. I just needed to say yes and get it over with. "Of course, Grant. I'll be there by 7. Tell your dad hello." I hit send. I knew what this was about. Marjorie had always regarded me with a deep, chilling suspicion. Our conversations at family gatherings were usually cold, polite, and sterile. Her gaze was relentless, always catching small details, the way I held my fork, the way I spoke about my job, the brand of my shoes, and piecing them together into a final, silent judgment. Every time I left a meeting with Marjorie, I had this urge to just sit in silence for an hour, processing the quiet interrogation. I wanted so badly for the final day before my wedding to be neutral, calm. But she wasn't going to let that happen. She had to have one last say, one last test. I knew it. And I knew I had to go. I didn't want to start my married life with a conflict already brewing, a refusal hanging over my head. I took a deep breath. "Okay, Marjorie. Bring it on." I immediately called my best friend, Shelby. Shelby is one of those people who just knows how to cut through the nonsense, and I needed her voice right then. I told her about the message and the knot of anxiety twisting in my stomach. "Are you kidding me, Audrey? The day before?" "She's a piece of work," Shelby said, her voice full of heat. "I know, but Grant said she insists." "I can't refuse, Shell. It would just give her fuel." I paused, walking over to the window. "I don't know what she wants." We've had a few difficult conversations about the wedding budget, and she even implied my choice of photographer wasn't upscale enough. I feel like she's going to hit me with some kind of final condition or critique. Shelby took a deep, deliberate breath on the other end. Listen to me, and listen close. Stay calm. Don't go in there trying to prove your worth. Don't try to impress her. Don't try to justify your perfectly respectable salary or your job. She's looking for a weakness, a flicker in your eye. So what do? I asked, half pleading. You turn the spotlight on her. Ask them about their latest vacation. Ask about Grant's father's hobby. Ask them about their life. You don't owe anyone an explanation for who you are or what you bring to the table. You don't owe her anything, sweetheart. You've worked hard for everything you have, and you're marrying her son because he loves you, not because you passed her inspection. Her words hit me like a solid anchor. Shelby always knew exactly what to say. I know, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I just wanted to be neutral. Let the last 24 hours be about excitement, not conflict. If there's a jab, you'll handle it, kiddo, Shelby reassured me. You've got the strength and the smarts to navigate this. You're not a delicate flower, Audrey. You never were. I smiled a genuine smile this time. Shelby had been my rock through so much, including a tricky legal situation years ago when I had to deal with a former business partner who tried to take advantage of me. I had hired a lawyer back then, fought hard, and won. I knew how to stand my ground. What Shelby didn't know yet was the biggest secret I was keeping. She knew I had studied languages in college, that's how I could speak Italian fluently, but she didn't know the reason I'd pursued that particular language. She also didn't know about the email. The one waiting in my inbox. I clicked over to my email app and scrolled past the vendor confirmations and the registry updates. There it was, an offer for a major project in Milan. I had spent weeks interviewing and preparing, pouring every bit of my energy into it. It was the promotion I had dreamed of, a huge leap forward in my career. I had passed the interview with flying colors, but I hadn't told anyone, not even Grant. It was too big, too life-altering to drop into the chaos of the last few days before the wedding. I planned to discuss it with him right after the ceremony, when the dust settled, or perhaps when the right, calm moment presented itself. The knowledge of that email, that opportunity, sat in my chest like a secret shield. It wasn't just a job, it was financial independence, guaranteed security, and a future where I called the shots. Whatever petty inspection Marjorie had planned for me tonight, I was holding the winning hand. I just had to get through the appetizers first. The rest of the day passed in a blur of last-minute errands. I picked up the bouquet, simple white roses, beautiful. I signed the remaining seating cards. I did a final, critical check on my dress, smoothing out an imaginary wrinkle. I was ready. The night air was cool as I walked the final block to Grant's parents' apartment building. I had chosen my outfit with surgical precision, a simple, tailored navy dress and gray low-heeled pumps. Nothing flashy, nothing to critique. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, low bun. The woman looking back at me in the elevator mirror had steady eyes. She wasn't a girl, not tonight. She wasn't a warrior, either. She was just a regular adult woman who wanted to marry the man she loved and build a home, but on her own terms. The tension, the quiet anticipation, was still there, a low hum beneath my skin. But the knowledge of the Milan offer was my anchor. I knew I had options, real, tangible options that didn't depend on Marjorie's approval or Grant's family's goodwill. I knew my worth, and that was something no amount of thinly veiled judgment could chip away at. At 7 on the dot, I rang the bell. The door was opened by Grant's father, Richard. He was tall, a little stooped now, with a gentle, kind smile that always made me feel instantly better. He always spoke calmly, choosing his words sparingly, and I genuinely liked him. He was the silent counterpoint to Marjorie's intensity. "Audrey, hello," he said softly, stepping aside to let me in. Come in, come in. Marjorie is waiting in the living room. He invited me into the familiar, impeccably decorated living room. Everything was perfect, the placement of the antique vase, the folds in the velvet curtains, the crisp edges of the magazines on the coffee table. And there was Marjorie. Her hair was perfectly styled in its usual flawless silver bob, and she was wearing a pristine light blue silk blouse, accented by a very large, expensive-looking pendant at her neck. Her expression was polite, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Audrey, dear, hello," she said, her voice cool and measured. "You look so delicate. I hope you aren't cold in that dress? It's quite late for bare arms." I immediately straightened my spine. Here we go. A little jab about my choice of attire, on the last day, no less. "Good evening, Marjorie," I replied, my voice even and calm. "I'm fine, thank you. And thank you for inviting me." Before I could continue the small talk, Grant emerged from the kitchen, thankfully holding a large salad bowl. He smiled genuinely when he saw me, and that genuine happiness, that relief in his eyes, immediately melted a layer of the tension. "Hey, you made it," he said, kissing me quickly on the cheek. "Dad and I set the table. Let's eat. Mom made her famous salmon pâté." We moved to the dining room. The tablecloth was linen, gleaming, and the dishware was polished to a mirror shine. Thin slices of salmon were artfully arranged on plates, and a small, elegant bowl of marinated olives sat nearby. It looked like a spread for a magazine shoot, not a casual pre-wedding dinner. The dinner commenced, and it quickly became the inspection I had dreaded. Marjorie asked questions politely, but it truly felt like she was filling out a comprehensive questionnaire on my life. "Audrey, tell us again about your company structure. Are they still paying you a fixed salary, or is it mostly based on performance bonuses now?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, implying that my income was somehow unreliable. "It's a healthy mix of both, Marjorie," I answered easily. "But the base salary is more than enough to handle all my expenses." Richard, Grant's father, sensing the mounting discomfort, quickly jumped in. "So, Audrey, Grant told me you're a great reader. What's your favorite book right now?" "I've been trying to get back into poetry." We spent the next 10 minutes discussing poetry, a genuine, warm conversation that was a welcome relief. Grant shared a funny childhood story about a disastrous camping trip, and for a few minutes, the atmosphere felt normal, easy, like a family. But beneath every pleasant phrase, that thin edge of steel was present, felt by all four of us. We were all performing, maintaining a delicate balance. By the time dessert arrived, a delicate lemon tart, the tension was thick again. Grant stepped out onto the balcony. The host had called to confirm the song for our first dance, the last little detail. Richard went to the kitchen to fetch the tea service. And I was left alone at the table with Marjorie. The silence that descended after Richard and Grant left was heavy, far heavier than any conversation had been. Marjorie picked up her fork and delicately broke off a tiny piece of the lemon tart. She chewed slowly, deliberately, studying me across the gleaming expanse of the linen tablecloth. I resisted the urge to fidget. I simply kept my gaze level, occasionally glancing down at my own plate, which I had barely touched. I had a small bite of the tart, letting the sharp citrus flavor cut through the rich butteriness. Marjorie cleared her throat, not quite looking at me. "So, Audrey," she began, her voice low, almost a stage whisper. "I know Grant has his own professional aspirations, and he's doing quite well, managing those accounts. He's very dedicated to his work here. He's on track to inherit a portion of the family's assets, though nothing is set in stone yet. I just wonder, how do you see the next few years playing out with your career path? It's quite competitive, isn't it?" It wasn't a question, it was a leading statement, a carefully disguised warning. She was essentially saying, my son is stable, he has family inheritance coming, and your ambitious little career might disrupt his established path. I met her gaze. "I've been very careful about my career, Marjorie. I'm happy to say I'm on a trajectory that offers stability and promotion opportunities. I believe strong professional growth for both partners only strengthens a marriage. We're both committed to our work. Yes, committed, she echoed the word, a slight curl to her lip. But Grant is anchored here. He has his father's business contacts, his clients, his entire life. Moving for a job, uprooting everything, that's a huge risk for a new marriage, don't you think? She dabbed her lips with her napkin, a gesture of finality. Grant is a good man, Audrey. He is kind, and he deserves a partner who prioritizes their future together over a whim of ambition. I felt a hot flush crawl up my neck. I wanted to scream that my life wasn't a whim, that I was tired of being judged against Grant's supposed family wealth and privilege. But I remembered Shelby's advice, stay calm. Don't prove anything. I forced a small, polite smile. I agree completely, Marjorie. Our future together is the priority. And I believe our future should be built on honesty and mutual success. Richard, bless his heart, chose that exact moment to return from the kitchen, carrying the antique silver teapot, steaming gently. The timing was perfect, interrupting the escalating tension. The tea is Darjeeling, he announced quietly. Grant, you want the light one, right? Perfect, Dad, Grant called back from the balcony, still talking on the phone. Richard set the teapot down with careful precision. Marjorie, seeing her husband had returned and the topic was about to shift, leaned toward him. Her face was conspiratorial, her eyes bright with malice. She spoke a phrase in Italian, softly, but clearly enough for the words to cut through the quiet hum of the room. It was an old, obscure saying, something about the folly of an outsider trying to wear clothes too big for them. It was a vicious, private little dig, relying entirely on the fact that I was the outsider and she assumed I couldn't understand. Richard managed a brief, nervous chuckle. Marjorie and Richard then glanced at me, their eyes filled with a curious, triumphant disdain, as if looking at someone who was utterly clueless, someone who had just failed the final exam. I lowered my eyes, focusing intently on the pattern of the tablecloth. The blood was pounding in my ears. I disliked scenes. I hated drama. But this wasn't just a petty jab about my bare arms or my career choices. This was a direct, calculated attempt to humiliate me, to test my reaction to their private ridicule, and to make it clear that I would always be an outsider. The day before my wedding. The nerve. My mind was racing, but my hands, clasped loosely in my lap, were steady. Every piece of advice I had ever received, every instinct for self-preservation, was screaming at me to keep my mouth shut, to simply nod, smile, and wait for the evening to end. But the sheer arrogance of it, the assumption that I was so uncultured, so beneath them, that they could mock me in a foreign language in my own presence, was a bridge too far. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about the boundaries of the family I was about to join. I remembered what Shelby said, if there's a jab, you'll handle it. I took a deep, silent breath, the air cold in my lungs. I kept my eyes focused on the tablecloth for another second, giving them the brief satisfaction of thinking they had won, that they had successfully put me in my place. Then, I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. The movement was deliberate, quiet, yet it instantly shifted the dynamics of the room. Richard looked up sharply, the teapot paused mid-pour. Marjorie, who was still wearing that slight, superior smirk, blinked, her eyes narrowing. I walked slowly around the table. I didn't rush. I approached Marjorie's seat, stopping right beside her. I could see the confusion starting to flicker behind her eyes, replacing the smugness. She didn't understand why I was moving, why I wasn't reacting the way a delicate girl should. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I leaned down just slightly, giving her my most genuine, yet intensely controlled, smile. I gently took her manicured hand, the one with the large diamond ring, and covered it with my own. My touch was soft, but my grip was firm. I looked her straight in the eyes. Her eyes were light blue, but in that moment, they looked frozen. And then, I spoke. I didn't stumble over a single syllable. The words came out in clear, effortless, perfect Italian. I spoke in a voice that was calm, steady, and utterly decisive. I let every word land with the full weight of my intent. Ho capito tutto. Vi state preoccupando per nulla. Non ho intenzione di chiedervi un solo centesimo. I paused, letting those first sentences sink in. I understood everything. You're worrying for nothing. I'm not going to ask you for a single penny. Marjorie flinched visibly. Her perfectly composed smile completely vanished. The surprise was instantaneous, a flash of utter disbelief. Then came the irritation, followed quickly by a dizzying confusion, the realization dawning that her private mockery had been utterly exposed. I continued, my grip on her hand remaining gentle but firm. I shifted slightly, making sure Richard, who was frozen by the tea service, could also hear every word. So come provedere mi stessa e soprendermi cura del persona cui tengo. Non mi serve l'approvazione di nessuno per costruire la mia vita o quella di vostro figlio. I know how to provide for myself and I know how to care for the people close to me. I don't need anyone's approval to build my life or your son's. It was the ultimate drop-the-mic moment. It wasn't an aggressive outburst. It was honest, calm, and irrefutable. I didn't call her out for being rude, I addressed the root of her insecurity, my perceived dependence on their family wealth or social standing. Richard's gaze immediately dropped to his teacup, his shoulders slumping slightly. He understood the language before Marjorie did and instantly sensed the profound awkwardness, the sheer magnitude of my counterattack. Marjorie stared at me, her mouth slightly open. The shock had rendered her speechless. For a woman who was always so meticulous with her words and presentation, this exposure was devastating. Right at that moment, Grant returned from the balcony, his phone already tucked into his pocket. He was smiling about the music confirmation, but the smile died instantly when he registered the complete silence in the room. He saw his mother's frozen, pale face, his father staring into his cup, and me standing over them, my hand resting on Marjorie's. Silence, thick and absolute, hung in the air. I finally let go of Marjorie's hand. I gave her one last, small, genuine smile, a smile of victory, but also a smile of pity. Then, I turned and walked calmly back to my seat. I sat down and picked up my water glass. The host had confirmed the song. The evening ended without a scandal, thank God. Marjorie somehow managed to collect herself, though she looked like a statue that had been chipped. She mumbled the obligatory words about the big day tomorrow and the need for me to rest well. Her voice was flat, but it carried a new, distinct caution. She didn't look me in the eye again. At the door, Richard gave me a warm, meaningful handshake, his eyes silently conveying something between sympathy and respect. Outside, the cool air felt glorious against my face. I walked along the avenue, feeling a deep, quiet sense of clarity. I hadn't wanted war, but I had wanted respect. And I had just bought it with 4 sentences in Italian. There was no smug satisfaction inside me, just the knowledge that I had taken a step that couldn't be undone. I had drawn the line. My marriage, my life, would be built on my foundation, not hers. My phone buzzed with a notification from Grant. You're amazing. I saw something happened. Tell me tomorrow. I replied simply, letting him know I was fine, and that tonight, he just needed to sleep. I wanted him to focus on the wedding, not the drama. But I knew the conversation was coming, and I was ready for it. When I got back to my apartment, I kicked off my gray pumps and let out a long, shaky breath. I put the kettle on for some herbal tea. The initial rush of adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. It's exhausting to go to battle, even a silent one fought in a foreign language. While the water heated, I went straight to the kitchen table. I didn't need to look at the to-do list anymore, I needed to look at the future. I pulled open my work email again. The offer letter was still there. It spelled everything out clearly: the year-long project in Milan, a full salary that was significantly higher than my current earnings, generous bonuses tied to project milestones, and crucial for a move, 6 months of rent covered in a temporary apartment. The manager's direct number was at the bottom with a strict 3-day response deadline. The clock was ticking. I reread the email, trying to envision our life there. Morning coffee on a little corner cafe, maybe a house with a balcony full of flowers, the Saturday markets, the unfamiliar yet exciting chime of the Milan tram. It was a picture of professional promotion and personal freedom. Then, I thought of Grant. We had been together for a little over a year, and he was everything I ever wanted: kind, attentive, incredibly loyal. But I recognized that he sometimes struggled to separate himself from his mother's influence. He worked hard, never complained, and was meticulous with his accounts and numbers. He was a man who kept his word and disliked carelessness. He needed quiet support, not grand gestures, and sometimes he chose silence over making a difficult decision. That was livable, as long as we could talk. I took a sip of my tea. This decision couldn't be a whim. It had to be a choice we made together, based on mutual respect and shared goals. I had drawn the line with Marjorie. Now I needed to see where Grant stood, not just on principle, but on our path forward. I looked around my apartment, the familiar posters, the comfortable, slightly worn sofa, the stack of unread books. Here, I had my routines, my friends, my warm evenings with Shelby, and the familiar cadence of my own language. Moving to Italy wasn't just about my career, it was about defining our marriage. Could Grant cut the apron strings and commit to a life where his mother's approval didn't matter? Could he handle the risk of starting over? The tension settled back in, but this time it was productive. It wasn't the anxiety of facing Marjorie, it was the healthy stress of facing a huge, amazing decision. I walked into the living room and sat on the sofa. I didn't want to overthink it tonight. Tonight was for rest. The big conversation, the one that truly mattered, would wait until morning. I would tell him, not as a threat, not as a condition for our marriage, but as a chance. He was an adult. He would choose. And I would not justify my dreams to him, just as I hadn't justified them to his mother. With that thought, I finally closed my laptop, turned off the lights, and lay down. Sleep didn't come immediately, but my thoughts flowed in steady, calm waves. I felt ready. Part 8, The Crossroads, 790 words. I woke up to the dampness outside, but my internal clock felt clear. I went through my usual routine, a quick yoga session on the rug, cooked myself a small bowl of oatmeal, and then I tied my hair back into a loose bun. I needed to look presentable, but more importantly, I needed to feel grounded. I grabbed my notebook, the one with the pros/con list from the previous night. I had written the 2 columns, and I looked at them again. Milan, freedom. Career growth. Project with international partners. The sea on weekends. No Marjorie. Here, apartment near the park. Friends. Habits. Familiar speech. Known faces. Stability. Grant's existing career track. Between them, I had scrawled that central question: who is she with there? Who is she with here? It wasn't about the place, it was about the person I would become, and the couple we would be, when the familiar safety net was removed. It was the ultimate test of our partnership. I called Grant. I need to talk before the registration, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Okay, he replied instantly, no hesitation. I'll be there in an hour. Don't worry about anything, okay? You just focus on getting dressed. When he arrived, I could tell he was anxious. He came in, gave me a quick, gentle kiss, and sat down on the sofa, not touching me, but just looking at my hands, which were resting on the notebook. He was waiting for me to lead. He looked around the room, taking in the small details, the half-packed suitcase in the corner, the light coming through the window. He was trying to delay the conversation, I could tell. Speak, he finally said, his voice quiet. I took the envelope, the one with the job offer, and slid it across the coffee table to him. I got a job offer, Grant, I said simply. In Milan. It's a year-long project. I want you to know now. I am not leaving today, and I am not setting conditions. I want us to look at this together, as partners, and decide. Are you ready to go or not? I don't want to hide anything from you, and I can't give up something this important to me. I watched his face as he picked up the letter. He read the entire thing slowly, meticulously, pausing at the salary figures, the covered rent, and the job title. It took him a long time. I just sat there, waiting, watching the stillness in his eyes. This was the moment of truth. When he finally finished, he placed the letter back on the table. You're talented, he said, his voice a little husky. Even I can see that this is a huge step up. This is your chance, Audrey. It's the kind of opportunity people work for their entire lives. I don't want to be the person who chains you to a radiator. He sighed. Look, I have nothing set up in Italy. Here, I have my work, my clients, a few reliable salary projects. I can do some remotely, but not everything. And yes, it will be hard for Mom. You know that. But I am not a child. I don't want to make decisions that come at the expense of your career growth and your dreams. He finally turned to me, his eyes clear and direct. I'll go, he said. It wasn't a hesitant agreement, it was a commitment. Not out of obligation or principle, but because I want to be with you for real. I'm ready to start from scratch there. I'll try to transfer some work. If it doesn't work, I'll find something new. I'm an adult. I'll manage. We'll manage. What about the Italian, though? You should have seen my mother's face. I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Good hit, he said, laughing softly. Right on target. No blood. I'll make sure our family doesn't have room for those kinds of jabs. Part 9, The Pre-Wedding Ultimatum, 750 words. Grant and I sat there for a long time, just holding hands. It was calm. It was settled. Decisions aren't always easy, but sometimes they're simple once you face them honestly. The decision to go to Milan wasn't about running away from Marjorie, it was about running towards our future, a future we would build together, away from any existing family influence. We had about 2 hours before we had to leave for the courthouse. I spent the next half hour walking him through the job offer details, specifically the salary and bonus structure, and the deadline. Grant immediately started outlining a plan to transition his clients. He was in full business mode, and it was comforting. This wasn't a leap of faith, it was a calculated risk that we were taking as a team. You know, you could have waited until after we signed the papers, Grant said, giving me a loving, slightly exasperated look. That was a huge bomb to drop right before the wedding. I know, I said. But I couldn't look you in the eye and say I do knowing I was hiding something this big. We need to be honest. Always. That's the foundation of everything, isn't it? He pulled me close, kissing my forehead. It is. And you are everything I need. Now, let's go get married before I change my mind about tackling a new language. We spent the remaining time getting ready. I did my own makeup, keeping it simple. Grant put on his suit, which I had carefully picked up from the dry cleaner earlier. We didn't talk much, just the usual pre-wedding murmurs, checking the time, finding the keys. The weight of the decision had been lifted, replaced by a quiet, deep excitement. We arrived at the courthouse just in time. My maid of honor, Shelby, was there, adjusting my dress one last time, her eyes shining with tears. Grant's groomsmen joked around, trying to ease the tension. Richard and Marjorie stood nearby. Richard smiled broadly when he saw us, a genuine, relieved smile. Marjorie, however, stood poker straight, her expression perfectly composed, unreadable. The confrontation from the previous night seemed to have been locked away, replaced by her public face of the perfect mother of the groom. The ceremony was beautiful. It was short, focused, and powerful. We said our vows, signed the documents, and stepped outside to a shower of rice and loud, joyful laughter. The reception was held at a small, intimate venue. The atmosphere was warm, the host unobtrusive, just as we had asked. Our first dance was to an old classic, and Grant held me gently yet firmly. It felt like a promise in action, gentle in care, firm in commitment. Shelby gave a short, precise toast, wishing us to always listen to each other and never shy away from simple, honest words. It was a beautiful, subtle nod to the conversation we'd had earlier that morning. But as the evening wore on, the drama wasn't quite over. Part 10, Grant's Vow and the Good Hit, 800 Words. During the dessert course, I saw Marjorie pull Grant aside. It was subtle, but I watched her speaking to him intently, her voice tense, her hand occasionally gripping his arm. Grant listened, nodding occasionally, but I could tell by the slight tightening around his jaw that he wasn't agreeing. He wasn't giving in. After a solid 15 minutes, they returned to the table. I felt Marjorie's gaze on me again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't disdain, it was a complex mix of frustration and grudging respect. I knew the conversation had been about Milan. After the celebration ended, Grant volunteered to drive his parents home, while Shelby and I headed back to the apartment to sort through the gifts and take the flowers. When Grant finally returned, hours later, he looked utterly exhausted and a little lost. He slumped onto the sofa next to me. It was about the offer, he confirmed, without me even having to ask. She's against it. Violently against it, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. She says I should be thinking about the long-term family business, about inheritance, and that I can't abandon everything for your job. She says it's irresponsible, especially now that we're married. She even brought up the old family college fund and how we were disrupting the plan. I put my arm around him. What did you tell her? I told her I'm not abandoning anything. I'm taking it with me. I told her this is our path for a year, a chance for us to build a life on our own terms. She thinks it's a whim. She asked me to reconsider. Said no one's waiting for me in Italy. That it's a huge, reckless risk. I knew I needed to anchor him. It is a risk, Grant, I said, calmly. But it's not a game. I know how to work. I know how to learn. I'm not going to Milan to prove anything to her. I'm going to take a step in my career, and for us to try being a family unit where no one knows us. We'll be judged only on our own merit. If you've changed your mind, say so. Don't be afraid to hurt my feelings. Be honest. He looked into my eyes, and the uncertainty vanished. I haven't changed my mind, Audrey. I'm scared, sure. It's hard for Mom, but I've made my choice. I don't want to live in a house where every single decision, from where we buy groceries to when we start a family, needs her stamp of approval. I love her, but I am separate from her. We are separate from her. We hugged, a long, deep embrace that spoke more than words. The faint smell of fresh linen from the new sheets, the soft rustle of the curtains, the quiet city outside. It was our first night as husband and wife, and it passed without grand pronouncements. We were too tired for theatrics. We lay quietly side by side, simply existing, doing what people do when words have finally said enough. In the morning, before Grant was awake, I sat down at my laptop. I composed an email to the Milan manager, accepting the offer, specifying the dates, and asking about the housing details. The decision felt firm and right. When Grant woke, he immediately emailed his partners about a transition period, requesting 2 months to hand over his tasks and clients. Later that day, a short message came from Richard, Grant's father. I support you. Go live your life. Marjorie, of course, stayed silent. Part 11, The Wedding Tension and Marjorie's Resistance, 780 words. The next 3 weeks were a flurry of packing, planning, and saying goodbyes. It was a hectic, draining period that tested our new marriage immediately, but it also cemented our partnership. We realized very quickly that to make the move official, we had to inform the family formally, especially since Grant was pulling back from a few responsibilities tied to the family business, a business that had long been connected to the family's wealth and potential inheritance. I knew I needed to talk to Marjorie one last time, face to face. It was 1 week after the wedding, and I met her at her apartment while Grant was tied up with a lawyer discussing his remote work contracts. The house smelled faintly of expensive laundry detergent. Everything was spotless, down to the perfectly folded clean towels stacked on the table, waiting to be put away. Marjorie walked into the dining room, her voice tight. "You're leaving," she said, not looking at me, but staring at the window. "You're taking my son away from his salary and his future here." I kept my hands folded in front of me. "I'm not taking anyone, Marjorie," I replied evenly. "I'm going with him. He is an adult. It's his choice, and he wants to go. He is excited about the professional challenges." "You always speak so beautifully," she countered, finally turning to face me, her eyes filled with thinly veiled contempt. "You have all the right words. But when this grand European adventure falls apart, when his clients dry up and your salary isn't enough to cover the cost of living, you'll come crawling back to our house. You'll ask for help. You'll need our money to pay for a new apartment or a college fund for your children." The image she painted was deliberately humiliating, the failed adventurers begging for scraps of their family money. I took a breath. I knew this was her power play, the threat of future financial dependency. I had to kill it dead, right here, right now. "If it falls apart, Marjorie, we'll get back up ourselves," I said, my voice completely devoid of heat, which seemed to surprise her more than anger would have. "I know how to live on little money. I know how to work with my hands and my head. I'm not leaving to return empty-handed. But even if things go wrong, even if we fail spectacularly, I won't ask you for money. Not because I'm proud, but because I don't want to hear again that I'm not in your league." Marjorie pushed her chair back sharply, the sound grating across the polished floor. Her composure finally broke. "Are you insulting me?" she spat out. "No," I replied, standing my ground. "I just don't want to keep justifying myself. You don't have to love me, Marjorie, but you can't control me through pain or the threat of financial ruin." We fell silent. Richard, sensing the air had become toxic, entered the room and put the kettle on, staying out of the conversation but clearly listening. His silence held understanding, a quiet, reassuring presence. Sometimes silence is better than words. I knew I had his respect, and that was enough. I left shortly after, the conversation hanging heavy in the air. I had said everything that needed to be said. I had established the boundary that would define our marriage. Part 12, The Final Confrontation, 770 words. The following weeks were consumed with the physical process of leaving. Our apartment slowly emptied. Books went into cardboard boxes, clothes were compressed into vacuum bags, and all our important documents were meticulously organized into clear plastic folders. Every tiny, mundane detail served to stretch out this transition, making the decision feel real, irreversible, and monumental. I watched Grant tirelessly handing over his remaining in-person tasks, attending meeting after meeting. He often came home late, physically and emotionally drained, and would simply slump onto the floor next to the piles of boxes. I didn't try to fix it. I just sat beside him, sometimes for an hour, not talking, just being close. That simple act of presence was what helped us both get through the sheer exhaustion of uprooting our entire lives. Our friends hosted several farewell dinners, each bringing small, meaningful gifts, books, small good luck charms, silly little mementos. Shelby gave me a soft-covered notebook, saying, "It's good for living." I smiled. I knew exactly what she meant, good for writing down the plans, the mistakes, the lessons learned. Marjorie called rarely, maintaining her distance, but once she invited us over for lunch. It was her attempt to show acceptance, making Grant's favorite salad. She sat across from us, listening intently to Grant's voice as he talked about his remote work plans, trying her best to accept the change she couldn't control. At the very end of that lunch, as we were standing up, she said quietly, looking down at her plate, "I don't know how I'm going to live without your Sunday visits, Grant." Her eyes looked wet, and she quickly nodded, dismissing the feeling. "Mom," Grant said, his voice soft but firm. "We'll stay in touch. I'll call. We'll visit for holidays. It's not a break, it's a step. Give us a year." I watched Marjorie nod. Letting children go is always painful, and distance makes it unbearable, but holding tighter only hurts more. She was finally beginning to understand that. At the airport, we arrived 3 hours early. The departure hall was crowded and noisy. Grant meticulously checked the luggage. I reviewed the documents one last time, the visas, the work permits, the contracts with my high salary listed clearly. The flight board flickered, showing our gate. And then, I saw them. Marjorie and Richard had come to see us off. Marjorie stood ramrod straight, but her shoulders betrayed her deep exhaustion and sadness. Richard spoke little, but when he hugged us, his grip was incredibly tight. "Live," he said to Grant, squeezing his shoulder. "You only get one life. Don't waste it on others' decisions." Marjorie approached me. I braced myself, expecting one last, sharp comment, one final dig at my ambition, perhaps a veiled warning about the risk of divorce that comes with such stress. But she stopped. Her eyes showed a rare, profound vulnerability I had never seen before. She simply sighed. "Take care of him, Audrey," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He doesn't always know how to say when he needs something. He takes after his father that way." "I will, Marjorie," I replied, meeting her gaze honestly. "And he takes care of me, too. We'll be fine." We passed through security. As we walked toward the gate, the sense of dread I had been carrying for weeks finally lifted. If you are still listening to this story, please help me out. Like this video and comment the number 1 down below, so I know you are truly amazing, and I understand that you have been with me throughout this entire journey. Your support is a huge encouragement and truly cheers me on. Please comment 1 so I can recognize you, and now, please listen to me tell the rest of my story. We settled into our seats on the plane. I took Grant's hand. He smiled, his eyes reflecting the relief I felt. Below us, clouds drifted, leaving behind the cities, the roads, the familiar pine trees, the warm kitchens, and the clink of spoons and cups. Up here, it was bright, clear, and quiet. There was no euphoria, just a deep, abiding calm. That was enough. Milan greeted us with a soft, gentle breeze and the light, foreign noise of a bustling city. The company manager met us at the exit, helping us gather our luggage. The temporary apartment provided by my salary package was small but bright, with empty flower boxes waiting on the balcony. The landlady had thoughtfully left a few essentials, plates, a pan, and a kettle. That first night, we slept on fresh sheets, exhausted but content, waking up to the new sound of trams clanging outside. The very next morning, I went to the office. Grant stayed behind to start unpacking and emailing his remote colleagues. At the international company, I was welcomed warmly. They gave me a desk by a window overlooking a lively street, introduced me to the 4-person team I would be managing, and handed me the detailed task plan. It was everything I had worked for, a clear path toward a significant promotion. The first few weeks were intense, like diving into a textbook written in a new language. New words, new faces, new routes to memorize. I kept my head down, worked hard, and wasn't afraid to admit when I didn't understand something. I asked questions, a lot of them. In the evenings, I would come home and tell Grant about the meetings, the cultural slip-ups, and the small victories. He would laugh, sharing his own challenges, the sheer confusion of setting up local banking and the complex tax codes he was navigating for his remote projects. He managed to shift enough of his consulting work to remote status to cover his bills, and he was slowly starting to find his footing. He didn't have the grand salary of my new job, but he was building his own business, brick by brick. On weekends, we were tourists, exploring the city, walking along the waterfront, eating simple, incredible pasta. We learned to pick out the best cheese at the market and constantly debated the merits of local coffee blends. We started chatting with our neighbors, the woman downstairs who gifted me rosemary cuttings, the old man on the corner who always nodded gravely as we passed. About a month in, I got a message from Marjorie. It was short. "How are you?" I replied briefly, working, trying. A week later, a photo came through. It was Richard, standing awkwardly at the stove, looking slightly confused, with a large pot in front of him. The caption was simple, "Learning to cook your soup." I smiled. I knew that was Marjorie's way of saying she missed him, and maybe me too. I sent back a heart emoji. Sometimes, small gestures, like small letters, are enough. Grant began finding local clients, consulting on financial reports and taxes for small Italian offices. He started bringing home these funny, short stories about the cultural differences in accounting. He was genuinely enjoying the challenge of starting from scratch. He realized that the family business had been a gilded cage, and this freedom, the pressure of building something entirely his own, was invigorating. We listened to each other's work stories like news broadcasts, and it felt incredibly good. Our partnership was strengthening with every shared challenge. In December, a thick envelope arrived, clearly postmarked from the States. It was from Marjorie. Her handwriting was neat, meticulous, and instantly recognizable. I opened it in the kitchen. There were 2 pages. I read the first page aloud to Grant. She wrote that she was struggling to adjust to their absence, that Grant was her anchor, and that she feared losing him forever. But then, she wrote the crucial sentence: she admitted her words at the dinner were foolish. She had acted out of fear and had chosen to focus on my financial standing rather than my character. The second page contained a question: would we come home for Christmas, even if only for a few days? Grant sat down heavily, his hands on the table. He thought for a long moment, looking at the letter. "Let's go," he said finally. "If you're okay with it, I want Mom to see we're fine. I want her to see that we're living a life, with work, plans, and happiness, and that we weren't running from her, just simply living for ourselves." We booked tickets for a week. Home smelled of pine and cinnamon. Richard, Grant's father, brought out a dusty box of old family decorations. Marjorie listened to our stories about Milan, the challenges, the fun, and the new salary structure of my job. She asked polite questions, and sometimes, she even smiled a genuine smile. The awkwardness of our last confrontation didn't vanish entirely, but it softened, like a piece of glass that had been polished over time. At one point, Marjorie and I were alone in the kitchen. She was pouring tea, and her hand was shaking slightly, dropping sugar past the bowl. I gently handed her a napkin. We both laughed softly. "I didn't mean to offend you that night, Audrey," Marjorie said quietly, looking down at the spilled sugar. "I wanted to protect my son from potential pain and uncertainty. I often confuse protection with control." I paused. This was a massive admission for her. "I'm not perfect either, Marjorie," I said. "I make mistakes, too, but Grant and I managed to talk through everything. That's better than anything else." Marjorie nodded, looking me straight in the eye. Then, in slow, slightly clumsy Italian, she said, "Sto ancora imparando, ma voglio parlare anche la tua lingua." I'm still learning, but I want to speak your language, too. I felt a rush of emotion. It was better than any apology I could have hoped for. I smiled widely. We drank our tea, opened a box of cookies, and called the men in. The evening was simple and warm. The bridge had been built. The year flew by. Marjorie wrote more often, her emails shifting away from inquiries about our plans to questions about Italian food, the weather, and books. Once, she sent a photo of a new recipe she found online. I sent her a video of my arrabbiata sauce simmering. We were laughing like students in a cooking class. Richard called regularly, his simple words a quiet anchor, asking if we remembered to rest, sending photos of blooming chestnuts in the park. In spring, Grant landed a massive, intense project. For 2 months, he worked at his limit, worrying that he wasn't giving me enough time. I was staying late on calls, fearing he felt sidelined now that my salary and promotion were higher. But we talked openly. We instituted a new rule: 1 evening a week was ours. No work, no guests, just dinner, a movie, a walk. It wasn't a rigid rule, more a vital habit. And that habit saved us. One late evening, we came home. The kitchen smelled of the fresh basil I'd bought. A thick envelope from my company lay on the table. I opened it. It was an offer to lead a small department in 6 months, a 3-year promotion contract, an even higher salary, a team of 4, and quarterly trips to New York. Grant felt a wave of mixed emotions, pure joy for me, and then a slight fear for himself. He saw the tension in my face, and I approached him. "I haven't accepted or declined," I said, putting the letter down. "Let's talk. I don't want my success to hurt you. Work matters, but so does family. I won't move forward if you're left in the shadows, suffering, or feeling like you need a lawyer to protect your interests. We're in this together." Grant sat, thinking, looking at my hands, the bunch of greens in a vase, the yellow lamplight. "I want you to accept," he said firmly. "I'll find a way to grow beside you. We'll buy a condo with the new salary. It's easier when we decide honestly. I don't want to hold you back. I want to take even half your step." I smiled. We spent the next day together. I signed the papers. Grant bought pastries. We celebrated alone and then called our parents via video. Marjorie smiled genuinely, said she was incredibly proud, and then added that she was going to study Italian harder than ever. In autumn, I showed Grant a home test with 2 pink lines. He sat on the bed's edge, grabbed at the air, unsure where to put his hands, then laughed and cried, all at once. I did too. We sat on the floor, holding hands, afraid to speak. Words scare miracles. We decided to tell our parents after the first doctor's visit. That evening, we video called them. Richard understood first and his face lit up. Marjorie looked at the screen, covered her mouth, and tears welled up in her eyes. She spoke softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Come for New Year's. I'll knit the baby socks, and I promise not to argue about the college fund or the inheritance or anything. I just want to hold your hand." I felt the old weight lift completely from my chest. It wasn't gone forever, but it had been gently removed, making it easy to breathe. Our marriage had survived the ultimate test, and we had built our future on honesty, not on any other family's money or approval. And that, my friends, is the only inheritance that truly matters. If you enjoyed this story, please share it with a friend who needs a little drama and a lot of vindication in their life. And I will see you all next week for another story. Goodbye for now. As the story comes to a close, it leaves us with a profound reminder about the strength of self-worth and the courage it takes to build a life on your own terms. Audrey's journey illustrates that true partnership thrives on mutual respect, honesty, and the willingness to face challenges together. In the face of judgment, doubt, and family pressure, she stood firm in her values, proving that resilience and clarity of purpose can turn even the most difficult situations into opportunities for growth. This story also highlights the importance of boundaries, knowing when to draw the line and protect your dreams without compromising your identity. It teaches us that while relationships with loved ones are precious, they should never come at the expense of our personal aspirations or freedom. Audrey's ability to confront adversity with grace and authenticity inspires us to find strength in vulnerability, to believe in our abilities, and to trust the power of honest communication. What about you? Have you ever faced a moment where standing up for yourself changed everything? Share your thoughts below or comment good if this reflection resonates with you. Let's keep the conversation going and inspire each other to live boldly.